Welcome, data people. We are Zuma. My name is Matt, and this is the Data for Good podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Zuma. Zuma is a dedicated recruitment company focusing on data positions across Berlin. The Data for Good podcast is for the world of data science, analytics, and engineering, giving you a platform to hear the thoughts and opinions of data leaders from Berlin and beyond. Today, we are joined by Bijan Soltani, co-founder at Gemma Analytics. Bijan, welcome. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. As an avid podcast listener, I'm a little bit excited and also anxious to now be on the other side, but looking forward to it.
Awesome. No, it's great to have you on. We've got a lot of wisdom, especially as a co-founder in the space as well. There should be some great knowledge and passion to tap into. First off, for those who aren't aware of yourself, can you give us a quick introduction?
Absolutely. Yes. So, hello, I'm Bijan. I'm the technical co-founder at Gemma Analytics. We're a Berlin-based agency for all things data related, and especially building scalable, efficient data functions from data infrastructure, creating data strategies for clients, hiring the data team that replaces us, and everything around that. Myself, I studied business in my undergrad some 10 to 13 years ago now, but I was always like a numbers person, so I gravitated to like economics and finance, and then over time basically accidentally fell into the whole data thing. I'm happy to go more into the details, but I think for now that's my story.
Amazing. And your tagline on LinkedIn, you can't buy happiness, but you can buy data expertise.
That's right.
So that aligns with that. Awesome. Today, we're going to talk about the emergence of analytics engineering, obviously an area that you're super involved in. So so much to cover. There's a bit of a journey and so much to dive into. Let's start right at the beginning. Very simple. Analytics engineering, what is it?
Yes. So probably everybody has their own little definition, but the way I look at it, it emerged as a discipline between the data engineer and the data analyst, where basically in the past you had the data engineer responsible for the ETL jobs, the extract, transform, load jobs, which was programmed, for example, in Python or other languages, where they would, for example, every night download all the data from the different data sources into a central place, and then often in memory on a server, on a huge machine, calculate the metrics, and then just upload the results to a data warehouse. And then the data analyst would use this data and analyze it, and build graphs and dashboards and do ad hoc analysis and all the fun stuff. The analytics engineer is basically someone in the middle of this process that kind of wedged him or herself into it, where maybe a data analyst was like, hey, I don't just want to have this data warehouse with this particular structure. I want to have a bit more of a say in how all these transformations happen during the ETL process. But maybe I'm not a software engineer and I'm not a data engineer, but I'd like to do this with SQL.
Yeah.
And then also on the data engineering side, you might have had a lot of people who were very deep in the technical side, but maybe were lacking the analytics insights that they needed to really build out a great data product for the analysts. So this role in the middle emerged as part of a shift from ETL to ELT, where the data engineer's role kind of shrank down into, okay, just make sure that the raw data moves from the data source into a central place, and then the analytics engineer takes care of all the transformations, all the data wrangling, cleaning, data modeling, all of that stuff, to then create basically the data warehouse in a separate step. So basically, it's all about separating the ETL into the EL, which shrank down the domain of the data engineer, and into a separate T transformation, which then became basically the area of the analytics engineer.
No, when did this start becoming a thing?
I think the process itself probably started way before I myself joined the data world.
Mm-hmm.
I think the process of basically using SQL to do your transformations purely, rather than using maybe some tools or that can basically do this, or using programming languages where you do everything in memory. Um, has been a process that has probably been going on for maybe even decades
Yeah.
over time, where you basically move from the ETL to the ELT. And there were a couple of steps in between. So, for example, you had people moving towards ELT processes, maybe not always talking about it, where then the T process was a bunch of SQL files where they had basically, when they run it, it would be drop table, create table as, and then they have their select statements, and then maybe insert statements below that, and you would have like these huge files where you would which would basically create one table after the other,
Yeah.
built in SQL. Something I've seen at the beginning of my own career, about 5 to 6 years ago as well. And then I think it was supercharged by DBT, which is a tool I think many of us know by now,
Yeah.
which also came on the scene about 6 years ago. Personally, I first worked with it in 2018, so about five and a half years ago. Um, and who they basically brought this whole idea into the into the center, where they say, hey, let's get rid of this crazy SQL files and make this a proper part of the data stack. And I
Mm-hmm.
think together with this process of DBT emerging, this role of basically the people who use SQL, and then one step further, who use DBT, maybe kind of wanted to have their own name, maybe wanted to have their own description, because they realized they're not data engineers. They don't program in Python, but they're also not data analysts. They do much more than that. They are more technical than that. And
Mm.
then there might have been a couple of blog posts somewhere. And I guess the rest is history. People started adopting this name.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess whoever coined the name was at the right time, at the right place, and just
Yeah.
gave a job a name that kind of emerged by itself, I would say.
A lot of comparisons have been mentioned of the full stack engineer or DevOps engineer. Do you see that yourself?
Um, I personally, I mean, I think um, the analytics engineer is a bit of is basically a specialization, right? So in that sense, it would be a bit the opposite of what I understand of a full stack engineer, which is someone who basically owns um, the whole stack from back end to UI UX
Mm-hmm.
components, and in a software application. Whereas the analytics engineer kind of goes the other way and diving deep into a particular part of the whole process, which is the transformations process, right? So it might be like a little bit of the opposite from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, in that sense, I would probably see the relation to the DevOps engineer, where there's basically this one particular thing which is becoming more and more important. In the case of the DevOps engineer, right? DevOps. And in the case of the analytics engineer, basically the transformations of data.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would definitely see that.
What does this mean for traditional data teams or data engineers in particular?
Right. So I think this is a great the great thing for data teams, because you can hire the right people for the right job. Um, if you think about data engineering, and I myself identify, so to speak, as a data engineer
Yeah.
in my day-to-day life, um, uh, data engineers need to be pretty deep down the rabbit hole. So they need to have DevOps knowledge, right? They need to be able to program well in the language, oftentimes Python. Um, They need to be able to deal with APIs. They need to have quite a deep knowledge of the whole tech process and understand basically DevOps and software engineering practices. And it's probably difficult to find somebody who has this skill set and this expertise, and who is also somebody with a great business acumen, with a great interest in understanding how can we drive value within a company using data.
Yeah.
And I think that the analytics engineer opens up a role for people who would like to be technical, who have a technical mindset, and who have technical interests and talents, but don't want to go too deep down the data engineering rabbit hole. Want to stay closer to the users of the data, to the stakeholders, closer to how is this actually driving business value. So it basically gives data teams an opportunity to create roles where you have a closer fit between the requirements of the role and the potential talent pool, and maybe also have less cases where you are like, okay, we have this candidate who's really good at this one part of the role, but is kind of not so interested in this other part. So I think that sense it's a great thing. And I also think the analytics engineering role in data teams is something, I mean, of course, it increases the number of roles you might have in a data team.
Yeah.
But it is often a role that, especially in startups, that can also be taken over by the first data hire or the first data analyst, or a person who kind of wears multiple hats. Whereas it's, I think, fairly difficult for the first data hire to be an excellent analyst and also be an excellent data engineer. So you can basically start with a core nugget of an analyst who also does a bit of analytics engineering, and when the company grows and the data team grows, then you kind of split this up into to multiple people wearing one hat instead of one person wearing multiple hats.
So initial hires at companies now are analytics engineers instead of data engineers, or when the company becomes successful enough to really invest in the data, you're seeing analytics becoming the founding members of the analytics teams now.
Now, I'm of course biased because the companies I see are companies that we work with, and they tend to follow our advice. But our advice is that the first data hire in a company should be, you might call them a data ninja. Doesn't need to be technical. Needs to be somebody who has an interest in technical topics, somebody who is able to deep dives, definitely somebody who has had some experience in SQL and wants to develop that further, or maybe is an expert in SQL, but not somebody who identifies as a data engineer, but rather somebody who is really interested in understanding the business and understanding how can the data that the business generates further the business. What analysis can help decision makers make good decisions? How can different team members in different teams use data for their purposes? How can you somebody who's really able to understand the nuts and bolts of the company and can map it onto the data of the company? So this is basically somebody who is an analyst, who is technical enough to write SQL and maybe technical enough to also wear this analytics engineer hat. But I would say that would be the ideal first hire for data in a company. And then I would say the analytics engineer is number 2.
Okay. Is the amount of tools available and the ever-changing modern data stack, if you like, is it making it even more feasible to go and bring in an analytics engineer and buy tools rather than build tools just to get your data function up and running?
Absolutely. So the data engineer really got the short end of the stick here. First, the analytics engineer take away the T from the extract and load processes, and then the tools, be there Fivetran, Stitch, Airbyte, and what are all the names out there, or some other players. Basically take away the extract and load part their jobs. I think at this point, it's very easy for a young company to build out a good data stack in the beginning, using just basically either SaaS tools like the ones I've mentioned or others, or even open source tools, to basically get their data function running without even the need to have a data engineer ever. I think in that sense, the analytics engineer kind of threw out the data engineer together with the help of the SaaS tools that have emerged over the last couple of years.
When would you switch back to bringing a data engineer back in alongside an analytics engineer?
Yes, I think there's a handful of use cases for data engineers still out there. Number one is if a company needs a custom data infrastructure, if they for some reason cannot use the SaaS tools that I have mentioned. And typical reasons that we see is number one is cost. So the more data you have as a company, at some point these tools just get prohibitively expensive, and you might want to build your own internal infrastructure, which might just be cheaper to build and maintain over time. The second part is GDPR concerns. So depending on what industry you're in, if you're like in a health tech or legal tech company, maybe you don't want to give all these US-based companies access to your customer data.
Yeah.
So then you might be inclined to have a data engineer build out a custom infrastructure for you, build it and maintain it. And then, of course, with time, complexity grows. So you will have cases where you have some weird tool that becomes important in your business, but doesn't have a easy to use API. So you might need the data engineer to take over and integrate that into your data stack. Even there, I would say probably technically minded analytics engineers can probably do this using cloud functions or lambdas or those tools these days, if they get into Python a little bit. But the more complex it becomes, I think the more a data engineer is needed. And then, of course, if you go into event-driven infrastructures, so if you are starting to work with tools like Kafka, if you are starting to look at real-time data, where it's not enough when the data is maybe 60 minutes old, but it needs to be really on point, really there, and you need to make sure that you have 99% uptime, and you can't afford for systems to just break down for maybe 30 minutes or 3 hours randomly here and there. Then you might have quite a need for a data engineer. But you already see maybe that's not the typical case for a startup who just did their seed round, but maybe something for a company that has grown and has some more intense needs.
I say I'm a data engineer. What are the upsides? It sounds like a bad end of the deal for us with the introduction of analytics engineers. What are the benefits for a data engineer?
Yes, you're right. Screw those analytics engineers. So personally, if I mean I am a data engineer, and as such, what I like about it is that I can really concentrate on the stuff that I like as a data engineer. I'm also an analytics engineer, so I also like the other stuff. But my inner data engineer is particularly excited in building efficient data infrastructures. Building deployment pipelines, building frameworks for myself and others to work in, to make life as efficient and as automated as possible. And in that sense, if you do get a position as a data engineer, I think you can concentrate really on this cool stuff. I have a suspicion that, as I said, I haven't been in the data. I've been in the data industry for about as long as the term analytics engineer exists. But my suspicion is that data engineers of the past kind of had to do this whole data transformation thing because they were the ones who were able to do it, not so much because that's what they really like doing. So I would say you get to really focus on the stuff that you enjoy as a data engineer. But then again, of course, the number of data engineering jobs probably has been significantly reduced in favor of the analytics engineer.
No, agreed. What about the other end of the spectrum? So with data engineers are having a hard time. What about the data analysts?
So I don't think the data analysts are suffering nearly as much, because the data analysts are basically the consumers of the product in some
Mm.
sense that used to be produced by the data engineers and is now created by the analytics engineers. So I think for them the impact is rather positive in that I think the quality of the data warehouses that they can work with has increased. The time to data I think is decreasing due to this development. So when they have change requests, they might get their changes much quicker. And also technically minded analysts are having it much easier to basically look behind the curtain and understand, hey, how does all this actually fit together? If you use DBT, they can spin up maybe the data lineage graph, look at the SQL queries, and really understand, okay, where is this data point really coming from? So
Mm.
it is where before you needed to dive into maybe Python or some other programming language of that sort to really understand what is going on and where your data point comes from, which might have been a bit more tedious. I think it is easier for analysts to understand where the data product that they're working with is coming from. And also, I think it's many analytics engineers started out as analysts. So the analytics engineer often comes from an analyst who found, hey, I get to not only have this analyst work, which I enjoy, but I also get to be more technical, which is an avenue that I think wasn't as open to data analysts before. So I think
Mhm.
the data analysts really won out here in this change.
We see with data scientists, they look behind the curtain and they tend to go towards data engineering because they get frustrated and impatient. Sounds like the similar journeys happening for the
Pretty
analysts.
much, I would say that's very, very similar. Yeah, absolutely.
And are you seeing a lot of analysts? Are you seeing any analytics engineers doing the kind of journey from data engineers all the way through to analysts, just as much as the analysts moving back?
I don't really, but that's also probably a factor of the kinds of roles and the kinds of work that I do see
Mm.
as a founder of a data agency. Because at 16 people now, we still don't have a single full-time data engineer in our team, right? So we have a couple of analytics engineers who sometimes do some data engineering stuff as well, or myself who sometimes still actively participates in client projects. But there's really it's usually not something that takes up a lot of time as part of the project work. So I don't even have the opportunity to see somebody who could potentially go down this
Yeah.
journey. But I'm sure there are many people who did or will go that way.
How much is to blame? Not maybe not blame, but to give credit to the ease of tools now and the level of entry is lower. That could analysts remove analytics engineers?
Could analysts remove analytics engineers? I don't think so. I have a strong opinion here, which is weakly held. I often find myself wondering whether I'm very much mistaken, but it's a strong opinion nonetheless.
Yep.
Um, that you need to have a human and maybe at some point an AI, but at this point, a human who basically generates understanding of the business, generates understanding how the tools the business used are used within the context of the business, is able to map this understanding onto the way that the data is made available from these tools, and then turn the data into a format that is easily understood, that is clean, that calculates the business metrics the way the business metrics are supposed to be
Mhm.
calculated, that creates a single source of truth for that. So in that sense, I very much doubt that the analytics engineers will be eaten by the analysts, even with much more improved tooling. However, I do see that the tooling of the analytics engineers themselves might change over time. So we see the coming of the semantic layer in various tools, DBT itself, as well as other tools. The first who really made this popular, as far as I know, is Looker with the LookML. And I think that's a very interesting direction. And I can imagine that a lot of the stuff that currently happens in SQL with the analytics engineer moves away from SQL and towards this kind of semantic layer. And it's quite possible that that's going to be the analyst who does this more than the analytics engineer. But then that's, for me, is more a question of tooling, not so much a question of roles. So the analytics engineers are safe for now.
For now, I like it. Where are we heading then? What's next for analytics engineering?
Ooh, that's a good question.
And we'll look back in 2 years and hold it against you.
I'm notoriously conservative in making predictions. And when I say conservative, I mean that my prediction is usually everything is going to stay the same, which it very obviously isn't. Just what the change that is going to come, who really knows? So I mentioned the semantic layer. I think that's a really interesting change. I think that's something we're going to be heading more towards. Particularly because you are still faced with the problem quite a lot that when an analyst might want to do an analysis on a particular table, maybe the granularity of the table that was produced by the analytics engineer wasn't quite right, or if the granularity is too large, then the analyst might have issue consistently creating the metrics in the correct way. So you need to have kind of some metric definition somewhere. Right, what is a gross margin? What do you subtract from revenue to get to gross margin 1 versus gross margin 2? Right, this kind of information changes from company to company, and this needs to live somewhere, needs to be centrally defined. And if you do this on the SQL side, maybe you take away the flexibility of the analyst to make analysis. So I think the semantic layer is a solution for this problem. So I would suspect that we're going to go further down this road. I think data loading will be even further commoditized. So everything that happens in the extract and load part, I think there's going to be more players going into the market here. A friend of mine recently started an open source tool called Data Load Tool. I'm sure it's a coincidence that it's called DLT, to basically take over this part as an open source tool. So maybe we will see more of that. Further commoditization on the data loading part. I think what we will also see more and more is businesses trying to integrate the trends that we currently see on AI into their businesses. And there's going to be there's already probably 20 businesses just in Berlin trying to do this, to say, hey, connect us to your data warehouse and we will run ChatGPT on your data, and every question you may have in your head, and then some will be answered by you just typing half a sentence into this chat box. I have my doubts whether this approach really will succeed, but best of luck to them. Would definitely be revolutionary. But I do think that to some degree we will see the AI revolution become more and more part of the general data stack. Probably more focused than what I just described. Probably still requiring quite a lot of manual work beforehand. Still requiring the analytics engineer to make the data available in a digestible way for AI models. But I think this is definitely something to look out for. Yeah, I'm as curious as you are to see where we're headed. I'm looking forward to checking out this episode in 2 years and see what happens.
Yeah, yeah, we'll definitely we'll keep an eye on all this. It's one of those human traits that we can see all the progress we've made in the previous 10 years.
Oh yeah.
But we can't picture ourselves. We think this is it. This is us. But yeah, the introduction to AI into the modern data stack, I think that could be another episode. in the near future, the way things are evolving. I'm conscious of time. It's absolutely flown. Now, this might be a bit of a biased question, but for those listening, contemplating, exploring analytics engineering, why should they get into it? Why should they take the leap?
Yes. Now the answer depends on who that person is. So if you're a data analyst, I would say just take a look under the hood, right? Take a look how all the data warehouse is created. If you don't know SQL yet, do a Udemy course or something else. Learn the basics. It's a little bit weird at first, but it's easy to master. If you are an analyst and a little bit numbers minded, I think you will find yourself with a beautiful tool. If you are somebody who likes working in Excel, then I think you are predestined to become an analytics engineer. I myself worked in Excel for a couple of years during uni and internships and all and whatnot. And even during my first data job, where I built a whole ETL pipeline just in Excel.
Humble beginnings.
I had no idea what I was doing. If Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets in these days is something that you like using, I think the analytics engineering pathway could be perfect. Of course, if you're a data engineer, the pitch is a little bit less gloomy, but you do need a job, so go into the analytics engineering pathway.
I'll look forward to the feedback from that comment. Perfect, Bijan. It's been an absolute pleasure. But that is all we have time for today. Thank you very, very much for your time and your rich insights. People want to keep up with you, keep up with Gemma Analytics. Where can they go? What have you got coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually, there's a Data Berlin meetup on December 12th, I think, where people can also meet me. And I think next year we're also going to have a couple, one in January or February, we're going to have one where I might also talk about the same topic. Other than that, hit me up on LinkedIn, send me a message, send me an email. Go to our website, gemmaanalytics.com. I would love to say at this point, I have this Twitter handle and this Instagram and post daily, but unfortunately that's all I've got. But if you want to get in touch, feel free. Looking forward to it. And Matt, thanks so much for having me. Was quite a pleasure. Was nice talking to you. Was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. It's been thoroughly insightful conversation. Some great information shared. And to the listeners, share your comments and obviously share the podcast so we can reach as many people as possible. But it is bye from us. Appreciate you, Bijan. Thank you.
Awesome, Matt. Take care.
Ciao for now.